Where to start? Fascinating. I'd like to start with the design perspective and just understand. I mean, I thought it was fantastic around multitasking of infrastructure, making the most of it, optimizing those efficiencies. But I was struck by your points about how we better understand where you go for a reduction in capital carbon, but then actually that could constrain a potential opportunity benefit in operational carbon. So understanding your energy flows and supplies, so how your source of energy in the first place and how that will vary over time in terms of contributions from renewables seems to me quite important. So how are you giving advice on these types of projects where you can, how do you decide that trade-off?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think we are only just starting to understand how to draw that balance. And it is also very much sector specific in a way. So I think something Chris mentioned in the morning, the infrastructure carbon review, and something that came quite clearly out of understanding what the carbon footprint of infrastructure in the UK at least is there is the capital, operational, user carbon, as you said in the morning, but actually overall the user carbon is potentially the biggest by far footprint and the most difficult to decarbonize as well. So starting something Lara and I were talking about yesterday, the road sector is the worst example in a way of how do we do this, because we have carbon-intensive materials. We just heard about asphalt being a big example, but it's only 5% of a total road footprint, the capital emissions, and it is very. To a presentation this morning from the Netherlands, how do you start thinking about the design of a road that minimizes the road emissions? I know electrification of vehicles and so on is coming and is going to solve quite a bit of that problem. But for the next 10, 20 years, we're stuck with the majority of cars being diesel. So we do need to think about this. It's something about the geometry of the road itself. So it has to be thought about really early on. It's not a detailed design problem, which is what most engineers tend to assume these days. It's about before you put pen to paper, is it a rail or a road? That's a good starting point. But we do need roads. There's no doubt about that. Is it a straight line? Is it a scenic route? What exactly? How do we deal with this, thinking that this is a road that's going to be used by an awful lot of cars and trucks?
Okay, so in many ways, it's actually having the mindset to think back. Early on in the day, I showed a slide which was just before the carbon language, which was the whole project lifecycle that included the strategy of actually what you're intending to do, then followed through a number of areas, including the brief and then into detailed design. But it's having that ability to think and future plan. Okay, so that's all well and good, but we are in the here and now at the moment. Okay, and so I want to just bring in Mats and Lara here. So great to know that these projects have delivered. Save costs, save carbon. If you had to take 50 or 60% of the carbon out of those projects, what would you have to do differently to deliver the project?
I think it's about how we engage our supply chain. So being comfortable challenging, I know we've all said it, but actually being comfortable to challenge and take on a change in specification, a change in design. We're a very risk-averse sort of industry as it is, engaging with our supply chain, but that filtering all the way down. So as I said, within the value chain, we're pretty much always a client to somebody else. So Costain has subcontractors that or supply chain partners that we're the client to. So I think if there was one thing that I changed to achieve that 50% reduction, it's how we engage with our supply chain and actually how we take on board the challenges. So at the moment, I think we're good at engaging, as an industry, I don't know if we're very good at actually always embedding that and taking that on board. As soon as there's a specification, it's always very difficult, or it tends to be very difficult to change. So I think that's something that's...
And so do you think the innovation that could and may well be available from material suppliers and products, do you think it's already there, and as a result you can utilize it? And if so, why aren't we doing it?
Yeah, I definitely think the innovation's there for most things. I mean, I've taken examples that are nearly, both projects are complete. The carbon wasn't really even a focus at the time, as in a key thing to... So the innovations, I think, are there, getting them into our projects as an industry as a whole, not just as a one-off pocket of innovation. That's where we currently need to improve.
So before I bring Mats in, okay, so they're incremental steps, they're projects in the past.
Yeah.
Is there any signs of what we're currently doing now that actually puts carbon at the forefront? So we heard of the transition change with the Stockholm Metro, where suddenly political will and everything else with the Climate Change Act in Sweden, suddenly the focus was more onto carbon.
Yeah.
What are we seeing? What are you seeing in your business? Are we putting carbon really where it needs to be? And as a result, are we aligning to get that deeper cut in carbon?
Yeah, I think we definitely are. I mean, the example of HS2, you won't win work if you can't actually demonstrate. That's a huge impact for any industry or any...
But as a result of it, what are we doing differently? Are we going to live in a world where we still need bitumen? Are we going to be living in a world where actually, even though despite at the moment, we've got some research coming through with replacement cement, but what is the... I've got a fly here, sorry. What about what have we got in terms of substitution? And how are you stimulating and having these conversations with your supply chain to encourage them to innovate and demonstrate there's a market for them? How do you do that?
I think it's genuinely getting them involved a lot earlier. So we've always been, as an industry, I've found that we're very siloed. So it goes design, contractor, and then supply chain. Actually bringing in our supply chain along with us to have those conversations, it unlocks, you take away the middleman essentially, it unlocks a lot of those conversations, something that wouldn't necessarily come up if it's potentially just a client and a direct contractor.
So Matt, is this happening in Sweden? Is your phone ringing off the hook with contractors saying, come and save me some carbon?
No.
Shame.
Why not?
But I think that the change is coming, but a wise man told me that business logic doesn't comply, and it's scary because from a behavioral point of view, changing is difficult for us as human beings, and changing specification, changing anything you want to change, there's an obstacle to overcome. So we can prove this many times, and by doing it many times, we will actually succeed. So I'm convinced that we will succeed, but as of now, for the major part of the projects, it's competition rules on price that is the overall in every project. But we've heard of all these projects, and they save cost, and they save carbon, but they save cost.
Yeah.
So why aren't we doing it in the first place? And that's where the business logic doesn't comply. So we need a driver, and we need to take some of the risk management away, or put risk management in there, in order to get drivers right for both the contractors, for the designers, and for the owners that are going to have the longevity of the works.
So in your sector, where's the leadership coming from, and how are you starting to engage to have these conversations so that we start to re-engineer the supply chain and you change the terms of the contract and you get smarter procurement? And what's your role in doing that, and are you doing it?
Well, I think it's a lot of it comes from trust. So when they start to ask in a procurement system, ask for a carbon emission reduction, you want to make sure that it's not just something that we write somewhere. It's in for instance, some of the municipalities have started to put procurement systems in there, saying that we want a carbon emission reduction. So when they do that, and they don't have staff to go out and do audits all over, they want to have like the environmental product declaration protocol in place, a published EPD that has been third-party reviewed according to a European standard. That is at least one step going
But you have that,
forward.
right? You have
We
EPDs
have that.
for your products?
Yes, we do.
So that's not an issue.
No, but the
So why wouldn't they trust that?
awareness, the awareness. I think it's an awareness situation. We're
And
still
so how do we overcome that awareness? And again, what's your role in leading that change?
well, hopefully communication.
And
Yeah.
which is what we're doing today.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so at what point do you think we will have a tipping point where society or those procurement agencies and your customers get an understanding of what is available and what we can do differently? How long do we have to wait for that to happen?
It's tough to say, but I'm, as I said, I'm an optimist and I'm positive that this will happen, and rather hopefully sooner than later. And the more of also this in the supply chain that can deliver this, that will mean that the competition is still alive. And if we have a good competition in this, we will also have a much easier way of implementing it. If we don't have competition, I see the problem to procure it and to make sure that you're actually doing something right. You're nodding here, Laura.
We'll
Yeah, I
bring them in
agree.
a moment. So
Completely.
in the future, do you think you could see your business being a business that would be bitumen free, but still providing, a certain type of covering for road services that provided quality, low carbon, some resilience? Is this where we're heading? And is the research and the innovation happening to deliver that? Or are we still going to be reliant on an oil-based economy to give us these byproducts such as bitumen?
I do think we are moving away from oil-based products. Might take a while, but the research, some of the research is already there. With this bridge competition that we've been part in, we've seen that there are solutions already there. We're not implementing them yet, but they're definitely both research, some of them already proven, and we can have high amounts of reuse of materials, for instance, going back into what they were designed for. Excellent. But large scale, that will take a while before it takes off. So it's
Okay, so Helena, I prefer not to live in hope. I'd like to have some certainty that we're going to get there and we're going to solve this problem.
Yeah.
What's your perspective? How can you help
Yep.
Matt and others, from your international perspective? Who does what well and how can we stimulate this?
I think solutions probably exist. There are also solutions that come out of talking to people you don't traditionally have been speaking with. And I think big projects, the likes of HS2 and the driver and the driver for carbon reduction is actually bringing out innovation, but is specifically targeting an existing problem. Like we're digging holes in the ground at the moment. We have an awful lot of waste we have to do something with. And we also need aggregates from somewhere. Could we be turning that spoil into aggregates? This is an innovation that's coming out of our thinking and talking with our material suppliers, talking about it with our waste people who we haven't necessarily, been doing in a linear fashion. Something that past 2080 has been brought a lot more clearly into a front line is this collaboration business, collaboration to achieve something that is pretty difficult to achieve using everybody's skill that you don't know enough about. So I will second the statement made earlier. I admit I'm ignorant for most things, but I know if I know who to speak to, we can solve a lot of problems together, hopefully quickly. We are risk averse as an industry, but we are also having, by setting ambitious targets, are pushing ourselves in changing our attitude towards.
So who does it well, or are we all pretty similar? How do we de-risk that? How do we bring in that innovation, not just at a project level? How do we mainstream it and commercialize it? Is it, do we look to, where do we look? Do we look into Asia? Do we look into the American market, Australia? Who does it well, or are we all struggling?
Good and bad examples everywhere from what I've seen. There are some places that have very very strong drivers. I'm thinking China at the moment, they are really pushing hard because decarbonization and cleaning the air is big, is as a matter of survival, actually. So they pull all the stops. Now, are they driving it well or not? There are enough incentives there to make things happen. So I'm watching that space with interest.
Okay. We need to wrap up.
Right.
So I want to, and we haven't asked the audience, so they're going to bombard you with questions in the coffee. I want you to give me one thing you'd like to change. Give me one solution, and don't say it's an integrated thing, we need everything, but just give us a soundbite of something that, from your perspective, we could do better, okay? And let's start with you, Mats.
We could definitely reuse our materials much better.
Okay.
Procurement for whole life value, not just capital.
Perfect.
Demystifying carbon, just making it simple.
Okay, so we now need to go into the how, but that is for the coffee break. Okay, fascinating. Thank you very much for your candid insights. Really appreciate that. I hope you in the audience got quite a lot from that conversation. If you didn't, and apologies you didn't have a chance to ask questions, but I did give you a chance. You now have them in the coffee break.